Hello and welcome to our complimentary webinar, which is brought to you today in partnership with GRIST. And we're going to explore the insights from the 2021 Service Excellence Award. In the spirit of reconciliation, Auscontact acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes, and during that time, with the help of today's special guests, Caitlin, David and Kate, we hope to inform about the science that sits behind the great customer experience, plus that ensure that in 2022, you're ready to enter this particular category as it's coming back. And to round off the session, we'll be having a Q&A at the end of the webinar. I'm Fiona Keogh, CEO of Auscontact and your moderator for today. While we're waiting for everyone to join us, let's use the time to quickly run through some housekeeping. Remember to interact with us today to maximise the benefit. And as you know, there's no need to take too many notes because we'll be providing you with a recording of the webinar. To interact with us, please use the Q&A button on the control panel. You can ask questions or make comments for Caitlin, David, Kate or myself from time to time. Don't forget, we're having that Q&A session at the end of the webinar, so please type your questions as we go along so you don't forget to ask them. If you're having technical difficulties, please note that on the control panel, you can click the yellow raise hand button and the Auscontact team will rush to your aid, or you can revert to your registration confirmation email and all the relevant phone numbers and access codes are available there for you. I know that most of you actually know how to ask a question, but let's try that Q&A button on the control panel now, just in case. And I'm going to ask, yes, believe it or not, a COVID question. So today's question is, what is the newest COVID variant called? Now, I think there's a couple of nice things that you can mention. It's actually the name of the 15th star in a constellation. I think that's quite lovely. Or it's the 15th letter in the alphabet. And obviously we have some very well-informed people with us today. In fact, everybody is correct. Well done. Yes, it's Omicron or Omicron, depending on how you work your way through the pronunciation. So I would love to now introduce you to our speakers. And they are Caitlin Ziegler, Director, Head of Innovation at GRIST, David McQueen, Director, Head of Sales at GRIST, and Kate Golby, Senior Behavioural Analyst at GRIST. And it's over to you, Caitlin. Welcome.
Thank you, Fiona, and thank you, Auscontact, for having us again. We've really had a lot of fun with doing this Service Excellence Award, and I'm really excited to share some of these insights with you, with the team, to give you a bit of a background, and so you do know how to, what calls to give us next year when you enter this award, as I hope that you all will. So first, just a little bit about GRIST. And at GRIST, we really believe that for change to deliver outcomes, we really need to make it as easy as possible for people to implement. So in our experience, lots of organisations haven't quite mastered this yet. It's especially when it comes to translating those really complex strategies or a full sort of conversation framework down into really simple, easy to adopt behaviours that their people can do. So we do this through a process called excellence by degrees, and that is we translate change into the smallest possible actions, and we call these micro behaviours. So you can kind of think about micro behaviours as being the elements on a periodic table. They really are the smallest bit that you can get to really assess whether something has been done or not in terms of a behaviour. So the micro behaviours are the foundation of everything we do, and you will see these micro behaviours as we move through this presentation in the assessment, and we're going to dig deeply into what some of these mean and what sort of outcomes they drive. But to give a bit of background about how we define a micro behaviour, and you can see here on screen, we've got 4 definitions around how we create these micro behaviours, or guiding principles, if you like. They have to be observable. You have to be able to see someone do them or hear someone say them. And by making them observable, it means we make them accessible, and that forms the basis of our assessment when we're looking at conversation assessments. Now, you can imagine that micro-behaviours, if you're thinking about how many micro-behaviours there might be in a conversation, it is thousands and thousands and thousands that could be demonstrated. So what we do is really bring these down to the core elements of the micro-behaviours that we know that are predictive of performance outcomes. And that way, you know that the micro-behaviours that are being demonstrated really do have that strong correlation with customer centricity, with conversion, with a whole lot of metrics on the other side of a customer conversation. And then the last thing that we look at here is that those micro behaviours are 100% within the control of the individual. They're not to do with system, they're not to do with things that are outside of the organisation. It is 100% within my control. As a consultant or an agent on the phone, I can do them. So that's a little bit of a background on micro behaviours. So what we do with those micro behaviours and then essentially put them into a framework, and you will have seen something, you would be very familiar with a framework like this, I'm sure, within your contact centres across Australia. You will have something similar, maybe different wording, but something very similar. So what you're seeing here is a really simple call flow. Engagement, there's discovery when you ask a bunch of questions, you present a customer with a solution, you get their agreement to move to the next steps, you might add in some value, and then you'll close off the conversation. And this is a pretty standard call flow that we would see across any kind of service conversation. So micro behaviours with a combination of the customer framework is what allows us to put together an assessment that lets us assess across multiple industries. And you can see here we've got the behaviours that we've assessed on the page. So these micro behaviours form the foundation of our assessment, and they really fit into that framework, and they are just 21 that are accessible across any kind of service call. And that was important for this assessment in particular and this award because we got a really broad range of industries entering, which was fantastic to see. And you can see we've got everything from government to banking to health insurance, utilities, to debt collection and food and beverages. So a wide range of industries, and all of those behaviours that you've seen are applicable to any kind of service conversation within those industries. So with that, I'm going to pass across to Kate in a second to take us through some of the really key insights and what the assessments look like. But to give you a bit of a guide about what we're going to go through today, we're going to look at some average service data. We're going to look at how the participants that entered this award compared. We're going to have a look at some best practice and, of course, what our number one did differently as well. So, Kate, across to you.
Thanks, Caitlin. Okay, so what we have here is I'm going to take you through our data at a real sort of broad level to begin with, and then we'll get deeper and deeper as we go on through this webinar. So what we're looking at here is what we call a customer journey. So essentially that's those key behaviours that Caitlin just showed us on the page, and they're pulled out of their benchmark and displayed as an entire experience that a customer has while communicating with the company. And so this is a frequency graph. So you'll see there up on the left-hand side there, we've got the percentages, and that is referring to the frequency in which these behaviours are occurring. It's not a quality. So if it displays 100%, that's if we saw it on all conversations, 0% is if we didn't see it. And this allows us to be completely objective rather than subjective. Did we see it or didn't we? Okay, so now getting to look at the data. So that purple line there that you can see is our Service Excellence Contact Centre data. So what we can see here is that across the board, the Service Excellence companies that we assessed tend to consistently provide a solution and keep the customer informed. They're those two big peaks that we see towards the middle of the conversation there. But the engaged behaviours there are kind of lacking a little bit. They tend to be down below 50%, so they're happening less than half the time. And this makes for quite a transactional process and process-driven, customer experience. So now if we move along and add in our new data set, what we've got here is we've added in over 1,000 assessments, service assessments completed by GRIST over 2020-2021. So this is a culmination of all of the service assessments that we've done in the past 12 to 18 months. And so what we can see here is that it really is following a pretty similar trend, pretty similar rhythm as the service excellence group. But for this group, the performance is slightly weaker. And I guess that's not really surprising. When we were requesting conversations from the service excellence group of companies, we were basically asking you to submit your best calls. And so what we can see here is that's really translated into the results that we've received. Those conversations are on the whole performing better than our average service conversation. We can see here that the enthusing and empathizing with customers behavior, it's about midway there. That behavior, even as an outsider just quickly listening into a conversation, gives an impression of a great conversation, someone being really enthusiastic with the customer. And so the fact that we can see this service excellence group doing that behavior twice as often as an average service conversation, it shows that this has likely contributed to why that call has been submitted to us in the first place. Now we're going to add in our top performer. So this is just a really great, step back view on how that top performer performed against that, that average here. And we can see on the whole that their customer journey, it still follows pretty much that same trend, that same pattern, but you can see just the consistency in which they're performing those behaviours is much higher. So the most obvious deviations that we can see here are in strong statement of assistance at the beginning and the check understanding, which is up there towards the end. And we're going to dig down into these a little bit deeper, these strengths that this top performer is doing. We're going to delve into a little bit later in the webinar.
And Kate, can I just ask you, we've got a shaded area on the graph here. Can you just tell me what that bit means?
Yeah, so because we received inbound and outbound submissions of calls, we have a few behaviours. For the most part, all of our benchmark behaviours are applicable across inbound and outbound conversations. But just at the start, as you would know with those different kinds of call types, there are slight differences in how that conversation gets started. And so you'll see there that there's one behaviour that's inbound only and two that are outbound only. And so that's what that shaded bar is, just to highlight those differences.
Thanks, Kate.
Fantastic, Kate. Thank you so much. I'm just looking at all the data points and it's mind-numbing. You guys look at graphs like this all the time. So, Caitlin, can I ask you, as a takeaway, what's the key insight that we're seeing here?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked, Fiona. It is sort of bamboozling looking at these graphs for the first time. You can see a whole lot of stuff. You go, oh, what do I look at first? One of the really key things to remember looking at these graphs is that we're not looking at 100% for 100% of the time, because that'd be a really odd and awkward conversation to see all of these behaviours being done 100% of the time. What's interesting, and what you'll see as we sort of move through some of the data as we dig into it, is different companies will do different things. And that's what we want. We don't want everybody doing the same thing. We want you to be looking at this and going, what are the signature behaviours here for me? What is it that I could take out of this that is going to become the customer experience at my organisation that's key for me? And you'll see that as you've got this data up here that Kate's sort of gone through, NIB have really concentrated on doing something different. Our top performer are doing something a little bit different to what else is out there. They've picked some really key signature behaviours about how they build rapport and how they look at that customer-centric conversation. And you'll see that other people do it differently. And that's a really interesting insight for us, particularly as you think about things like building rapport. And I would imagine that everyone who's on this conversation today will be familiar with the words building rapport and may even use it within their contact centre. Right, what we need to do with the customer is build more rapport. What we find is that saying building rapport is a concept, it's at a high level. What's interesting when you dig into data like this is you can start to understand what are the behaviours that do actually build rapport with customers, and they are different for different organisations. For NIB, you can see they're quite low on the seek to engage behaviour, which traditionally is quite a big rapport building behaviour. But they compensate with this by all of the questions that they ask and all of the structure that they set up front within the conversation. So they are still building fantastic rapport with their customers, but doing it a little bit differently. Further on, you'll see how other companies build rapport, which is, again, is a different way of looking at it. So I think in terms of looking at this graph, that's really key. Think about what is a signature for me. What could I take out of this for my organisation and my team to take home to go, this is what I want out of this. So enough about graphs. Let's move on to something a little bit more. It's some strengths that we saw through this assessment. And these strengths are overall strengths that we saw across all of the calls that we assessed. And Dave, take it away with a couple of strengths.
So the first strength we're going to have a look at is a great one, and it's a behaviour that we call empathise or enthuse. So you'll see here that the GRIST average service data shows the chance of receiving a demonstration of empathy is actually only 1 in 4. However, at the Australian Service Contact Centre data, which is all your data, we saw that this happening was almost twice as regularly. Yep. So this easy, small change can make a big difference to the interaction. I mean, people don't know, or people don't care what you know until they know how much you care, right? So they're unlikely to accept a consultant's recommendation until they're sure that you actually understand their situation. You know, this behaviour, when done well, can diffuse tension, can reduce call handling times, and deliver a much better customer experience. And importantly, actually reduce the consultant's stress as well. You know, we've all heard of the worst case scenario in this sort of behaviour, like, you know, missing a family member that's passed away and we miss the chance to demonstrate empathy. But one of the big ones that we hear often that consultants miss is an offer of congratulations after a new baby. You know, there's something about adding a new child to the family that makes, you know, that seems to make people want to actually get their services in order. So, you know, something like this is just one that's so easy and should come so naturally, but we tend to encounter consultants that are so focused on a solution that they actually forget to enthuse about their situation. And we're not looking for anything complicated. It's just a simple, oh, congratulations is more than enough to score on this behaviour. Now, I know many of you are and have been working on, you know, making your customer experiences more humanistic. So well done, because you're ahead of the pack on this one. Another standout behaviour that you all did was keeping the customer informed. You know, and by keeping the customer informed, you can help the customers to feel engaged in the process, and it offers a feeling of reassurance that you're actually working through their inquiry. You know, this behaviour involves your customer in the process and helps them to avoid any confusion. I mean, the main impact here is that it really gives the conversation a real sense of professionality. And to be more than 10 percentage points above the average here really points to how well your teams are representing your brands. You know, Kate, you know, there were some brands though that really stood out with some of their behaviours through here, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we've done to sort of highlight those really outstanding efforts in certain areas is we've created these almost best practice awards. And so let's jump into our first one, which we've got here is our engagement award. So, you know, as we know, you know, engaging and connecting with customers right up front in that conversation really helps to, you know, make them feel welcome and, you know, connected, and, you know, by assuring that you're going to help them. So our engagement award winner, Aussie, regularly referred to customers by name, you know, proactively sought to engage with them, advised what to expect in the conversation. They sought permission to proceed with the conversation. And it really just set up their conversations in just a really nice, warm, welcoming way for that customer. These behaviours also engender, you know, involvement and maintain some trust and confidence between the two parties, the consultant and the customer. So if you look at the example we've got here, it can be as simple as this, you know, something like, sure, not a problem, I can help you with that. May I start with your name? Oh, hi, Dominic, how are you going this morning? Oh, sorry to hear that. Well, let's work on getting that stress removed a little bit. And that's all it takes, just a little bit of back and forth. It just creates that really human experience, that a real genuine interaction between the two parties. We can hear right from the get-go that that consultant has established that safe place for the customer and built that trust and rapport, or at least begun to. And as you can see, we just squeezed 5 behaviours in that short, sharp interaction. So it's a great way to start the conversation off, and then we can continue to sprinkle those, you know, engagement behaviours throughout the rest of the conversation to maintain that human feel to it.
Great. You know, one of the second standout areas was around the agreement question, and that's when a consultant asks a clear and obvious question to check the customer's satisfaction with the solution provided. So you'll see here that, collection house and well done, like 79% of the time they're asking that agreement question. Now, I suppose when you're saying, when you're trying to get debt collection and you want to get clear acknowledgement from the customer that they're going to, as you say, do you want to pay back $50 a fortnight through this? It's a really clear time that you want to get the customer's agreement. So, by doing this, it really engenders buy-in and provides this opportunity for the consultant to address any concerns that the customer has when you start to get that agreement from them. And it sounds like a great question for those of you that want to get an agreement for your customer to take action. And it is, however, it's also relevant for most service inquiries to check with our customer to make sure that we feel that they're addressing the solution to their problem. So for example, it could be, are you happy with everything that we've covered today? Or does everything that we spoke about sound like it addresses what you called for? These type of agreement questions can work really well in every type of service interaction. Some of you may be saying to yourself, hey, we can't always fix every problem a customer has. An agreement question is often more powerful even when you can't help. So, for example, you might say, so look, sorry we couldn't help you with that today, but did I explain it so that you can accept the reasons why? This can often result in less rework, fewer callbacks, and really can increase the customer satisfaction. All these things are all impacted by this particular behaviour.
Thanks, Dave. Kate, and look, I want to say at this point a really big congratulations to our finalists, and we've seen a couple of them there with Aussie and Collection House and just how well they did in that assessment, but also starting to see that idea of the signature behaviours coming through. So I want to just acknowledge that we did have some runners up, and it was ANZ and Synergy. We're right behind our number one in terms of the assessment, so I do want to acknowledge that they were very, very close. But also at this point to say a big congratulations to NIB, who was our winner for this award, as you would have known from the award ceremony we had a couple of weeks ago. But it was really excellent to see, and we know that NIB has been on this journey for a long time, this customer-centric journey, and lovely to see that translating into their calls and their assessment as well. So with that in mind, I just want to move into some of the things that NIB did extremely well and just differently to the rest of them in terms of that call assessment that did set them that little bit apart and got them that first award. So Kate, I'll pass back over to you.
Thanks, Caitlin. All right, so our first behaviour that NIB did really well, and I mentioned it up front when we looked at that journey graph, was the strong statement of assistance. So what we found that providing a strong statement of assistance conveys and conveyed in a really sort of genuine manner lets a customer know that the consultant is happy and able to provide them with an answer to their inquiry. And this can put them at ease that they've come to the right place. And we found that 8 in 10 customers that came through to NIB are receiving this, that really reassuring statement early on in the conversation. Something like, I'll definitely be able to update that for you on your account today, Megan. That would be perfect. That's a best practice example.
So Katie, if that's a strong statement of assistance, is there such a thing as a weak statement of insistence?
Yeah, we find that there's, often an example of it not quite being there. So something like, okay, we'll see what we can do, or let me look that up for you. You can hear there that it doesn't really instill that same confidence as the other example did. The customer, doesn't really let the customer know that they're in the hands of someone that can and will help them.
Kate, like I said before, some of our clients take calls where in situations where it's likely that they can't help, or that most of the customers don't meet certain eligibility criteria or something like that. So is it possible to have a strong statement of assistance in situations like that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where the key of the word assistance is. So a strong statement of assistance is saying that they can, not saying that they can deliver a solution for them, but it's saying that they can, they're in the right place to help them. So letting the customer know that they'll do everything they can to help them. For example, you could adapt that wording to be something like, we can definitely walk through the process together and check your eligibility, or something maybe, I'll absolutely look into that for you. So it's still got that strong language, and there's still that reassuring aspect to the statement, but it's not guaranteeing a solution in any way.
Yeah, that's great, because in my experience, people can lose their confidence with this behaviour when they actually don't think that they can help. Maybe they've had a run of calls where they haven't been able to help, and it sort of comes into their vernacular where they lose this strong statement. So it's more about letting the customer know that they're actually being helped by an expert, right?
Yeah, exactly. Fantastic. All right, let's look at the next behaviour. And what we've got is the ask relevant questions to uncover why the customer has inquired. So we spoke about engagement behaviours already earlier on when we talked about our engagement award. And this is actually one of those engaged behaviours in disguise. So interestingly, the Australian Contact Centre staff, our service excellence group, sometimes forget how to have the real conversations. So if you think about it this way, in a chat with your mum on the phone, you're naturally going to ask, questions about what's going on, follow-up questions based on previous comments and responses. So, why does this behaviour get left behind or forgotten when we're conversing with customers? NIB consultants were really adept at this behaviour, using, 60% of their conversations, they were really delving into why that customer was calling. And that enabled them to get a deeper understanding of the customer's underlying reasons for the call, and really just demonstrating a curiosity and interest. And that will engage a customer and deliver, a more unique experience for the customer.
Okay, what can I say? You have me at hello. This is one of my favourite behaviours of all time. Many of our clients actually fall out of this behaviour because of the relentless nature of their role. So depending on what's going on, sometimes they've got to deal with the same or similar customer inquiry, like call after call after call. And what happens is that we lose a little bit of our curiosity. We've heard it all before. So I know why this is a problem for you, so let me just fix it for you. The thing I love about this behaviour is, as a coach, I can coach it, yes, because we can coach to ask relevant questions to uncover the why. It's so much better to coach that than asking your team member to be more curious. That can be actually much harder to achieve for a consultant.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a bit like, what Caitlin mentioned with build rapport. It's like, okay, I like the idea of it, but, how do I do it? So we've broken that be more curious, ambiguous behaviour so that it can really just be practiced. We know what we need to do to get that outcome. Okay, and our third behaviour that NIB just really excelled at was the check customers' understanding. And, that's possibly due to the complicated nature of a health insurance conversation, that NIB were experts at checking their customers' understanding with the information that they're providing, both along the way and at the solution stage. Encouraging the customers to consciously acknowledge that they understand something, it helps prevent confusion and misinterpretation. And so it also allows customers to voice any concerns and questions at that very moment, just providing that opportunity for them to ask questions. It's also really effective when done at various points in the conversation, after chunks of information have been given. That can still be really useful just done once at the end of a short, seemingly simple inquiry. So remember that apparently, simple solutions can benefit from a check understanding. Customers have called for a reason. They don't understand something. So let's help them by, checking that they do before they go.
I'm always really surprised at this one, Kate, of how little it's done. It really surprises me. But what's the consequence of not doing this behaviour in a service conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. And, pretty much you probably saw where I was heading at the end there, that customers leaving, not understanding a conversation, they're going to call back. So that, first call resolution is definitely going to be impacted. They're going to be calling back because they haven't had the opportunity to ask questions and, maybe being afraid to jump in, or, afraid of feeling silly for not understanding something. So that's the first one. You also find even that, at handling time, your AHT can be impacted, because if a customer doesn't understand, consultant might need to backtrack. They might be asking a lot of questions on information that has already been covered. And they, consultant can even go down, the wrong path because they've misunderstood. So by having those various points in the conversation to clarify that both parties are on the right track or both understand what's going on is really useful.
Absolutely. It's kind of getting over that curse of knowledge, right? As a consultant or an agent, you're really used to having the conversations 100 times a day, and you kind of can, it's easy to forget that the customer, this might be the first time they've heard something and heard the jargon or heard the way you've presented something. I can see how powerful that would be, just this little behaviour to just check in. Exactly.
Yeah. Good one.
I just want to recap on some of those development opportunities that we looked at there. And these were the ones that Kate sort of explained so well, thinking about the conversation as a whole and what our number one performer really did differently. So that strong statement of assistance, I can absolutely help you with that. That ask the relevant questions to uncover why the customer inquired, that get curiosity demonstrated at the beginning before you get into solution mode. And then that check understanding, which drives such a customer-centric conversation right through, which can be demonstrated all the way through the conversation, but particularly after you've presented that solution. But here's another one for you, which Kate, I'll get you to explore this as well. This is something that everybody can work on, right? This is something that we see quite low across the board.
Yeah, exactly. And that's that, ask relevant questions to expand on that why, that broad reason the customer's called up. So asking those follow-up questions to gain a deeper understanding, or, even to clarify the customer's broad needs. It really helps the consultant to gain that deeper understanding, and it demonstrates that, that curiosity and interest that we really want to hear in a genuine interaction. And so that lack of connection in a process-driven approach can leave customers feeling quite flat. But gaining that deeper understanding of customers' underlying reason for calling and demonstrating that interest will engage a customer and deliver a much more unique experience for them. The added bonus, obviously, is that the information uncovered in this discovery can help consultants to add value later on in the conversation and explain, personal benefits about the solution that they're providing.
It's always good practice to ask a question or two more in follow-up to what you've just heard. So it's one of these techniques to demonstrate that you've really been listening. So for example, let's say a customer rings because they're having trouble logging into their account. You ask questions to expand on the why and find out that they're actually logging on to move funds around to pay for the deposit on their new home. Rather than just giving them their login details, it takes all of 10 seconds to actually demonstrate some enthusiasm, maybe with a follow-up question about the why, and go, oh, congrats, or where did you buy? This type of thing. It goes a long way to deepen the relationship between you, your organisation's brand, and indeed your customer. It doesn't take much at all.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. And I think, Dave, you mentioned a story about a team leader that coached on this behaviour. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, so just recently I was lucky enough to observe a team leader start to coach some of these behaviours. It was actually two of these behaviours. It was empathise, enthuse, in combination with ask relevant questions to expand on the why. And when the consultant was working with that, within 9 weeks, this consultant moved from like 3/4 of the way down the performance ladder and into the top 10 within their entire organisation. So it wasn't just the two little behaviours that really made the big difference here. We get the change in behaviour, but what was more important about these behaviours was the change in mindset that occurred. So coaching these two micro behaviours, it helped the consultant to just look a little bit deeper into the customer's situation. So it changed her approach, and it wasn't long before the consultant could see the connection between showing care for her customer, actually driving better outcome for the customer, but also delivering her own success.
Yeah, so it really is that change of mindset that has such an impact on so many points of the conversation, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's the power of some of these micro behaviours we're talking about. It seems really simplistic on the surface, but it's the mindset it shifts that's really the important thing.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Dave and Kate. Look, we've just had a bit of a helicopter view of quite a number of behaviours and had a little bit of a deeper dive into some of them. But in doing that, let's talk about a really straightforward service inquiry. Caitlin, how would that be assessed?
Yeah, that's a great question, because we sort of get this a lot. You kind of assume that to be able to demonstrate a lot of these behaviours, or a good number of them, it's got to be something that's quite complex. It is going to be a complex inquiry. I've actually got a graph prepared for this, Fiona, and I want to share this with you. This was a really simple, straightforward service inquiry. AHT was very low. It was under 4 minutes. And you can see a single call assessment, and it really hit on a lot of the behaviours within our benchmark. This would have given it an excellent score. This would have put them right up in the top percentage of calls that we assessed in terms of quality, but really straight and straightforward, really short and straightforward, I should say. So a really nice demonstration of how these behaviours aren't complex. And there are different ways to demonstrate them depending on the situation, which is why we look at behaviours rather than a script as a better way to think about a conversation flow, but really easy to demonstrate in a short amount of time. And I think how Kate's brought in some examples all the way through, and David as well, of just those how simple it can be, that we're not actually looking for something complex. We're looking at little shifts, little changes with that. And along with that, David, yeah.
As you said before, Caitlin, and even in this example, it's not about getting 100% for every single behaviour, because that just would sound really weird and artificial. It's just about the combination of, you're looking for consistency of these performance of these behaviours through the call. So this is such a good example, because it doesn't hit all of them, but it hits a lot of them, right?
It does. And you can imagine, you could hear what this conversation would have been very customer centric, thinking about how they sort of confirmed that willingness to proceed, how they sought to engage and empathise and enthuse, ask lots of questions before they got into that solution mode. It is getting less transactional, as we see as a general trend, and much more customer centric into building that rapport right up front with that one. So I wanted to show you, moved in the wrong direction. One last little graph for you, which is just an interesting kind of tidbit of information, if you like. We often get the question around AHT and quality, and how much you have to sacrifice in terms of AHT when you're looking at quality measures like this. And I must say, it was really, really refreshing. We've done a lot of catch-ups this week with all the participants who did enter into these awards, and we've been catching up to give them a little bit of insight into their individual data about how they performed. What's been really refreshing for us to hear is that it's not something that's being measured at the consultant level in many contact centres anymore, which is a huge step forward. We really want to be looking at behaviours, the things that are in control is what we're looking at measuring from a consultant level, rather than something like AHT, which is not always within their control. So that was really refreshing to hear. But just as a general trend, you can see this is a little scatter graph we did up when a bunch of the assessments we just randomly selected, we had a look at, and we looked at plotting what the quality of that conversation was against the AHT. And you can see for the majority of them, we're all sitting in a really healthy AHT here, pretty standard. But also, while we get a very, very slight upward trend when we're moving up in quality, it pretty much plateaus. And we're not actually sacrificing that efficiency over quality. In fact, I would say that there is a point where speaking for longer is not necessarily going to give you a better chance of hitting those behaviours. It really is about hitting the right ones at the right time in the right sort of conversation in that scenario that fits. So great question, Fiona, and I think there's definitely a chance to sort of dig into that efficiency versus quality conversation with your team and with your organisation to really interrogate what that means for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, cultural fit, what's important, and, too often we hear do more with less and the customer gets left on the roadside, as do your people. And it is actually an algorithm that create the great outcome. We're going to get you guys to do some work while we go into Q&A, because you've been sitting back, relaxing, looking at all the data points. So while we're asking some questions that you've provided, pick one of the following. What behaviour will you take away to work with on your team? Is it a strong statement of assistance? Ask relevant questions to uncover why the customer has inquired. Check understanding, or ask relevant questions to expand on the why. So while you're responding to that, I have a number of questions that have come in for the team, which is brilliant. So the first question is, do we suck all of our QAs? What do we do with them?
That's a great question. Look, a QA team is really essential. but a QA team has got to work in conjunction with your leaders and the coaching as well. Like we've got to be on the same page there about what good looks like. And Dave, I think actually you had a really great example of how QA can tie into that, or how we can use QA differently for that.
Yeah, QA is such an important function, you know, and typically for a lot of our clients, QA, they look at two things. They look at the compliance aspect, which is nothing that we've spoken about today, and they also look at that quality of the customer conversation. So let's say they're always going to play a really important role for the compliance. When it comes to the quality of the customer conversation, you know, depending on the tenure, the experience, the insight of your QA team, will pretty much depend how the reaction that their feedback is received by consultants. So, you know, so often we hear examples where the feedback feels quite subjective, and therefore, you know, your consultants go a little bit to the feedback, because it's like, oh, you need to build more rapport, you need to be friendlier, you need to, you know, ask more questions, you need to be more curious. You know, this type of feedback. Now, of course, you know, that feedback at that level, it's very conceptual, and as a result, it feels subjective. Versus if you can just narrow it down to the micro behaviours, the QA team could really start to offer much more behavioural based feedback that the consultant could see or do. They can say, hey, we want you to use the customer's name more. We would like you to actually acknowledge or empathise, enthuse at least, you know, once or twice in a conversation. We would like you to check understanding once or twice during a conversation. It's very hard then to sort of like push back as a consultant against that feedback, because it's much more objective in its nature. So we think that QA teams provide a really important role, and as Caitlin said, work really nicely in conjunction with the team manager. And micro behaviours give you a shared understanding of what good looks like.
Fantastic. Thanks, Dave. Matt has a question, and it's a question about people that have a very close relationship. And what he would like to know is, how would you assess interactions for account managed type relationships, so they're, you know, pretty tight, where an agent may speak with their client on a weekly or monthly basis? Would you do it differently?
Well, not really. The process of assessing a micro behavioural conversation would be the same, but Matthew, what would change is the types of behaviours that you're assessing. So not some of the ones that we've spoken about today in the 21, but at GRIST we look at over 70 different micro behaviours. So for example, you know, if you've got a close relationship, you might have a behaviour such as, you know, you paraphrase or summarise your previous conversation before you set the agenda for the new conversation. Yep. As you ask questions, you might ask a question that refers to some previous knowledge. And so they're just a different set of behaviours which we haven't shared with you today. But yeah, so in short, assess it exactly the same way, but you're using a different set of behaviours that are much more like key account management or account management orientated.
Thank you, but probably with a lot of the same core components. In terms of where you're looking for the behaviours and what behaviours you're checking for. So we have another question, which sounds like somebody's really keen to get on the road with this. How can a new team get started with implementing some of these insights?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the key there is, if it is a new team, and if you've just looked at all the information that we've given you there and gone, oh, wow, that is so overwhelming, where do I start? And we're just on the road to this kind of quality, getting to the quality and the customer centricity. What do I do with this? I think it's really important to get the buy-in from the team that this, as transparent as you can be, is fantastic for everybody, right? Everybody is on the same page about what you want to achieve. And if what you want to achieve is that customer centricity, it's really about sitting down with that team or with your leaders and going, what is it in our conversation that we want to focus on first? Which one are we going to pick? And what we always recommend is, don't look at this as even though the holistic conversation, looking at all those behaviours in combination, does combine to be a really great quality framework, all you want to do is actually narrow that down to just 1 or 2 to start with. So get your team working on just 1 or 2 behaviours, and all of the same ones, so they can sort of support each other in that role of going, what can we do to be famous for? What do we want to concentrate on that we can all work together to start this journey of behavioural change, I guess, is what we're looking at here. And what you'll actually find is when you concentrate on just 1 or 2 behaviours and everyone's clear about what they're doing, it's actually going to ripple through other behaviours. If you're concentrating on seek to engage or empathise and enthuse or strong statement of assistance, you'll find that your consultants will start lifting other behaviours as a consequence of knowing what I'm working on and knowing that I'm working towards customer centricity. They will start lifting other ones as well. So you're going to get kind of a dual, it's a beautiful way of introducing that into your team. But definitely start small. Start with 1 or 2.
Yeah. Choose carefully is a really good phrase here. Because as Carlton said, that ripple behaviour. So, for example, if you chose, for example, to summarise the conversation before moving to the solution, just that behaviour itself, that behaviour can strip hours of training out of your induction process when you've got your active listening kind of training, because actually you don't need to do it, because when you hold yourself to a standard of summarising at some point in the conversation, to do that, your consultants' listening skills must go through the roof in order to do that. Listening skills disappear when we don't hold ourselves to the standard to summarise before we progress to the solution. So, I think that, as Caitlin said, have a look at your KPIs, and the key here for your team leader is to be able to translate that metric into just a few, maybe it's 2, 3, 4 micro behaviours that are actually all predictive of a better result in that metric. What happens, the progress principle starts to kick in then, because when they start to do 3 or 4 behaviours, they start to move that metric and they go, yeah, that's some excitement. Well, what else can we do? And you kind of end up layering in different micro behaviours until eventually you build a whole conversation framework.
Fantastic. Well, we've got a very difficult, well, maybe not a difficult question. Have an anonymous attendee who would like to know, how do you see this work differently, if at all, in an escalation or a resolutions or a complaint team or scenario?
That's a great question. That's in fact, Kate, it might be one for you for this one with the escalations and complaints. Similar to the account management, there are some nuances when we're looking at complaints conversations that we may look at some extra behaviours that you'd want to put in there. But fundamentally, a lot of those behaviours you will see exactly the same within a complaints conversation. So, Kate, would you want to add to that one at all?
Yeah, so I think that with these kind of scenarios, the big one is absolutely going to be those engaged behaviours. So the empathising is going to be a big one, and those questions to find out at the root of the cause. So those the ask questions to understand the why and the expand on the why. That's really going to help the consultant get a really good understanding of the full picture, because sometimes with complaint scenarios, it's really tempting to try and just band-aid fix the problem at hand, and it actually will likely be, depending on the issue, will likely be just something that then continues on because we haven't discovered the root cause of the problem. So it absolutely can still use those same behaviours, just tweaked to the scenario. But I think the engaged ones are a must-have in these scenarios.
Yeah, and let's face it, Kate, nobody tends to ring a contact centre to say, gee, thanks for my bill, or, thanks for the refund I didn't get, or whatever it might be. They are typically low-level complaints or issues that a customer has. It's just when it gets, perceived to be out of control. We have another question that's come in. And Dave, you spoke to how you, through coaching an agent, went from 0 to hero. Let's just call it that as the analogy. But on average, how long does it take to implement the micro behaviours?
That's a big question.
It's good, isn't it?
It depends, because, we have clients that have quite complex conversations, and when you look at all the different types of conversations that they have. There could be, we've got clients that have anywhere from like 90 to like 110 different types of micro behaviors. Now, of course, not one consultant would use all of those behaviors, but there's, for example, there's conversations for a general inquiry, there's conversations that are much more like on a personal advice type of inquiry, etc. So, you know, it can take some time, but the first step is to understand the concept that little things can make a big difference. Then you start to get them to start to master some little behaviors, and you just keep adding layers in. So we tend to think that over 12 months, you kind of can get those signature behaviors for your organization that you get across a whole range of different teams, across multi-site centers. You can get some consistency of your signature experience. Typically, it takes our clients up to 3 years, though, before they really start to have a level of mastery over multiple conversation types, multiple levels of difficulty of micro behavior, and truly get that true level of mastery of a full conversation framework across multiple scenarios.
Thanks, Dave. Well,
I would just, can I add something to that, Fiona? There was just one tiny thing. The only other thing that I would add to that is that the reverse is also true. If we're thinking of sort of a short term, when you're just coaching one behavior at a time as a coach, if you find you've got a team member that's stuck on an engaged behavior, let's say for months and months and months, then there's a problem there. And the problem is not skill, it is going to be a mindset issue. So while we say, yes, it can take quite a long amount of time to embed this sort of thing culturally within an organization. As a coach, be mindful about how often they are tiny little things that you can do differently straight away, that you should be able to action straight away. You still need time to practice and to build up your skill and build up your comfortability with actioning that on the phone. So it may take you a couple of weeks or 3 or 4. If you're really finding that you've got a team member stuck on a behavior for months and months, dig into that a bit deeper.
Yeah, it becomes the skill versus will conversation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interestingly, this same person also asked, can GRIST help?
Yes is the big answer to that, Dave. Yes, and look, I should pass this over to you, Dave, being our head of sales. But yes, we do work with organisations to design frameworks specifically for their conversation. So, and that's a big part of what we do at GRIST, is look at the nuance and those signature behaviours and what is the experience that you want to create for your customer, and how can we design around that. In conjunction with that, we also look at leadership programs and how those leaders can really coach behaviourally. So how do we take those micro behaviours in a conversation framework and coach them from a leadership level and embed them as a culture within an organisation? So we take those two-pronged approach to that. Where you see our benchmark behaviours, we have some really great foundations and data around what those foundation behaviours are that lead to those really great outcomes. But every organisation is going to be a little bit different as to what you really need to get out of your customer and what outcomes you're looking to drive with your consultants. Dave, I'm sure you'll want to add to that.
Oh no, I think you've covered it nicely. You know, I think part of getting that signature type of experience for any organisation requires leadership that actually understands how to coach a micro behaviour, how to be a behavioural coach. You know, we tend to find like a grow coaching sort of structure not necessarily the best way for it doesn't really help to get the level of clarity or granularity required to get down to such specific behavioural actions, and so that sometimes organisations need a little bit of help doing that, because it's really easy on its surface, but then sometimes coaches just have trouble articulating or getting down granular enough in their actual coaching sessions as well. So both those things work in conjunction with each other.
Thank you.
Sorry, Fiona, you go.
Please, Caitlin, you go. No.
I was just going to say that, at GRIST also, we are big believers in that we want this to be sustainable, that when we walk away, that it is really embedded in your organisation as a culture. We're not in there to just, you can only do it the way we want to do it. We want to train your leaders to be embedding this. So when we walk away, it's that conversation stays, that framework stays as part of your culture.
Okay, we've got a bit of a trick question. Well, maybe it's not a trick question. So we're seeing CEOs all over the world saying, I'm going to differentiate my business and my organisation based on customer service. So how can you ensure that the micro behaviours are reflective of that organisation's culture? Is there a way? Is there a secret sauce?
Oh, well, there is, yes. And I think, Caitlin, you're probably best to talk to this, but, you know, again, if we just chunk up from the micro behaviours for a moment, if you look at a conversation structure, what's more important is to make sure you hit the different phases of a conversation, that you engage your customer, and then you can actually do that discovery component, for example. Now, if you engage, our frameworks are intent-based conversation frameworks. So that is, it's actually more important to us that you meet the intent of the conversation than it is just a tick a box of all the behaviours, because that's just a waste of time to tick the box. So again, Caitlin, you're best to talk to it, but when you have an intent, such as if you talk about the engage, what is the intent of an engage part of the conversation? Now, typically it might be something along the lines of to help a customer feel like they're being helped by an expert. So to do that, what we have to do is we have to make sure that all the behaviours there is I'm giving a credibility statement to help you, Fiona, feel like I am the right person to help you. Combine that with a strong statement of assistance and then an agenda statement or a process statement, all of a sudden you're starting to bring that life together. However, some consultants do that really well without necessarily doing the micro behaviours. Yeah. And so what's important is that they meet the intent. So how do we do that then? Is we find your organisation vision and values, and the intent statements get tailored. And so sometimes you might want to say, hey, we don't want you necessarily to be seen as an expert at the start. We want you to be seen as really friendly, or we want you to be seen as, I don't know, dare I say, humorous or whatever it might be. But you then translate that intent into the actual micro behaviours. Have I explained that well enough, Caitlin?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's exactly, it would sort of hit the nail on the head there. And it's coming back to that vision and values. I worked for many, many years in branding, and I can tell you how when you think about branding and you think about that external face of the company, what I think companies, when they're saying that they really want to live that sort of human-centric, you know, be differentiated by customer service, they want to bring that branding internally. You want the internal face to match the external one. And that's where I think GRIST makes a really big difference to that conversation, is matching it up. If you're putting this message out that this is how you want to be and this is what you want to be known for, how do I reflect this in what my agents and consultants are doing on the front line, the ones that are talking to my customers? What are they doing to demonstrate those vision and values and that intent level?
Thank you. Thank you. Hasn't that hour gone so quickly? And there are still more questions that have come in, which will be answered by the team post the webinar. So I'm going to ask for some closing remarks from each and every one of you. Kate, would you like to go first, then Dave, then Caitlin? How's that sound?
Absolutely. I guess we should just firstly thank everybody for submitting your recordings. It was a pleasure. I actually listened to the majority of them at least once, so they were a pleasure to listen to. So thanks for sending your best recordings, and I hope you enjoyed the experience, and we'd love to do it again next year if possible.
Thanks, Kate. Dave.
Well, again, thanks to everybody that participated. We love being able to add value. And Fiona, thanks to you and the Auscontact team. Fabulous to be part of it. You know, again, as I said, we love the fact that, you know, you kind of subscribe to the fact that little things can make a big difference, and it isn't that hard to really start to look after our customers. And you know, we love being able to help the Australia's best suppliers, being able to help Australians do their thing better. So thanks for having us involved.
Thanks, Dave. And Caitlin.
I'm just going to echo probably Kate and Dave. Yeah, a huge thank you for everyone who submitted, because the first time running this award, and we got a really great submission. And as Kate said, some fantastic calls, which were really fantastic to listen to. Very much looking forward to seeing this year's or next year's entrance, I should say, and see how those awards progress and who ends up with the top spot next year. But also a huge thank you, Fiona and Jess. It's been an absolute pleasure to be working with Auscontact. I think we're very, very well aligned in terms of our values and how we look at the customer conversation. So it's been fantastic to be involved with Auscontact through this. Thank you. you.
Thank you very much. And it's been an absolute joy for us to work with you guys in our inaugural year, and we were very excited to hear when we were talking before this webinar that you wanted to be back in 2022. So I'm going to advertise that we're launching on the 2nd of February. Be there, be square. Well, don't be square, just be there. And hear some more from GRIST, from our judges, and from 2 of our national winners who have done amazing things. Thanks to everybody this year for your support. I can't believe I'm going to say this is the last webinar for 2021. Last time you get to see my ugly mug on screen. Thank you once again to GRIST for your support, to everybody that's been here for giving up your time. Stay safe, stay away from Omicron, and we will see you next year. Have a wonderful Christmas and New Year. Take care.
Thank
Merry
you.
Christmas.